No, not at all. In fact, it's been very interesting looking at the activities of Tourism Australia, but also too looking at the activities of the federal government. The federal government's actually had two things going. Firstly, there's this beginning of a bubble with New Zealand. And I guess one thing that has been happening is that all the mistakes for a tourism bubble have actually been occurring, because at the moment it's a one-way bubble. It's only involving part of Australia. So basically New South Wales, ACT, Northern Territory and South Australia are involved in it. The other states are not involved in it. The other problem with this particular bubble, of course, is when New Zealanders actually go back to New Zealand, they actually have to pay $3,100 quarantine per person. So this bubble hasn't started off very well. It's also too, no Australians can go to New Zealand. So a bubble, if it's going to work well, has to be a two-way street.
I guess
it has to be no quarantine in either direction. And certainly the candidates, coming back to your real question, is firstly, after New Zealand, I would say probably the Pacific Islands and Fiji, and in particular because Fiji is very, very heavily financially dependent on tourism. Korea, as the Qantas CEO mentioned, is definitely on the cards. Japan is on the cards. Singapore is on the cards. And the reason that these countries are on the cards is that their rates of coronavirus are actually very, very low. So the risk for Australians travelling to those countries is quite small. Interestingly enough, of course, we still have the fundamental problem is that the Australian government is actually still telling people that international travel is banned. So until that changes, all of this idea about wonderful bubbles isn't really going to take root until that change occurs. And I suspect that we're certainly getting ready for that. The government's getting ready for it. But we've had big problems with bubbles, and not only in our part of the world, of course, in Europe.
Yes.
There have been bubbles actually going for a while. Countries keep changing the rules basically on a daily basis.
Well, I guess with the pandemic, the situation is constantly evolving and we're trying to adapt to that. How do you think we'll see the travel industry open up eventually? How gradual would it be? What kind of time frame do you think we'll see? Will it indeed be bubble by bubble?
In a sense, it will be bubble. For Australia, definitely be bubble by bubble. What happened in the European Union is that a lot of countries actually started bubbling together. And then they were finding that when the rates of coronavirus, say in France, Spain, the UK and other places, then some of those bubbles closed because there were lockdowns occurring. So I think it very much is a bubble by bubble proposition, certainly so far as Australia is concerned. I think our government is going to be very careful about that. Certainly the New Zealand government has proven already that it's very, very reluctant to just open the doors of New Zealand. I think it is really incumbent on the government, though, to get away from the travel ban to perhaps an advisory. This was probably an error that's been made because it's made Australia actually look like one of the most extreme countries in the world when it comes to actually limiting the opportunities for people to travel. And of course, there will be time because airlines have to resume services. So one of the problems that we have, even if tomorrow we said, okay, we're Australians are free to go to Japan and Korea and other places, we need the airline services up and running. And I think they'll be very, very keen to do it because Australia traditionally is a very big global tourism market, particularly outbound. 11 million people last year.
Do you think travellers from Asia are more or less likely to choose Australia as a destination post-COVID?
I would say in all likelihood, yes. Despite some of the problems that we've had, particularly in Victoria, Australia's overall record in terms of being a safe coronavirus destination is actually one of the best in the world. So people would feel safe. And in fact, even when you start comparing Australia perhaps with some of our neighbouring countries in Southeast Asia, we've done incredibly well. So there is a desire certainly to travel. Interestingly enough, I think we used to rely very heavily on the Chinese market, and China would be a very logical place for Australians to travel to and for Chinese to travel back to Australia. And of course, we then have the political side, which is complicating that issue. So I think that certainly targeting Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea would actually make a lot of sense. These are all countries who are doing very well. I might also add to that mix Vietnam, which has also been very effective. Thailand is being very careful about who it's letting in at the moment. So it will be, I think, to come back to your question, Yvonne, it's very much a bubble by bubble proposition.
I love these new words that we're getting used to during the pandemic, bubble by bubble and bubbling. What do you think travel to and when do you think travel to and from the US and Europe will return to normal, I guess, in a sense?
I think it's going to take a long time. Look, if you're going to be the most optimistic person in the world, we'd be looking at probably over a year. And the simple reason for that is that the Northern Hemisphere now is coming into its winter, and we've certainly seen a big spike in coronavirus in most Northern Hemisphere countries. So I think the Northern Hemisphere, with a few exceptions, and I particularly point out China, Japan, South Korea, and a few other countries like that, are doing very, very well. But certainly our very popular destinations in Europe, traditional popular destinations in Europe, the United States, Canada, and of course South America, are very much off the table for quite a while. And I think looking at the mood of governments in all of those countries and at the mood of our own government, we're going to be treading very, very carefully. If it was left up to travellers, we'd want to go to all of them.
Well, which could also explain why we're seeing such a boom in domestic tourism as well, which is a good thing for many countries too. Dr. David Beirman, thanks so much for joining us on The World Tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.